Yeah, welcome. This is going to be more of a conversation than anything. We're here to represent Music Support, the charity, who do a lot of work within the music industry, very specifically for good mental health and for support for addiction recovery, which is the main reason why we're here today. So we'll start off with a quick kind of introduction as to who we are and then why we're here. Seye, I'll let you start. Who are you?
Hello, everybody. My name is Seye Adelekan. I'm a musician. Mainly, like my main day job, I guess. I play with Gorillaz and with Damon Albarn. I have done for probably about 10 years. But I have been a professional musician for about 15, sort of touring and in the studio and producer and songwriter, etc. That's kind of my link to music support. And who might you be?
So nice to have you here.
Pleasure.
I wear a number of hats, like most people do in the music industry. I'm a tour manager. I've been a tour manager for around about 20, 25 years. I work with PJ Harvey, Grace Jones, Clean Bandit at the moment, lots of illustrious people I've worked with. I also run a peer support group, which is very much about trying to help people build community, because a lot of us who work in this industry are freelance, and that's brought up for me. It's helped educate me with a lot of the issues that are in the industry. So should we talk a little bit about why we're here?
I think so.
Seye, would you like to share what's your connection with addiction?
So I am currently 4.5 years, just over 4.5 years clean and sober, having had quite a terrible time of it, as this industry can be quite conducive to making some pretty questionable life choices. But yeah, I'm a person in recovery. I spent about 10 months in a rehab facility, residential. So it was pretty intense. It was in the middle of a motorway near Leicestershire, in a converted, it was like an old Best Western hotel or something like that, which sounds glamorous, but it really wasn't. In like an all-male facility. So I spent a long time sort of getting to grips with my addiction and have been clean and sober ever since. And that's kind of, I've since been very vocal about my relationship with addiction, but also in general mental health with touring musicians in particular is quite an important thing to highlight, because it's not all the glitz and glamour that Instagram might make it out to be. It's actually, it can be really nerve-wracking, really uncomfortable, really boring, really exciting, really dangerous, really, but it can also be really helpful, really healing, really fun. So it's a really heady cocktail of different feelings and different emotions that, let alone, can really cause a lot of damage if unchecked.
I think you've just described a lot of reasons why people get into the music industry, because it's that kind of attraction of the heady mix of the highs, which inevitably have the lows as well. I wonder then, if you spent, a significant amount of time in a rehab facility, at what point did you come to the realization that you had an issue that needed to be tackled?
Well, to be honest, it became way more apparent to people around me than I was really ready to understand myself, which I think can be the case. It obviously has to be an internal decision, but things crumble around you, and it's really hard to, you can tell yourself all the lies that you want, but it becomes noticeable. You start being late for things. The quality of your work starts slipping. The quality of your relationships starts slipping. Your creativity goes to pot. It's like all these things, you start letting people down and doing all sorts of things that you wouldn't normally. So actually, it was this enclosing circle of like bad things that got closer and closer and closer until I couldn't ignore it anymore. And eventually my partner had to make the call to call my parents, and they eventually were able to sort of shake things for me. But also work had dried up, and that was a really good indicator. There was just this gulf of time, and it was just like, actually, I think I need to go sort it out. Thankfully, I had a bit of a support system. I had family, I had friends. But it took a long time. It took years, actually, before it had to get really, really, really bad, unfortunately, which doesn't have to be the case. Ideally, you would reach out and get help before it got to the point where you'd spent all your money and loads of debt and people hated you. Do you know what I mean? But it took a lot of people, actually, to start pointing it out before I couldn't ignore it anymore.
It's interesting, actually. You give me the perfect opportunity to say a couple of things about Music Support, the charity we're here with. First of all, I was thinking from what you were just saying, your partner sounds like she was key in getting you into recovery and the support of people around you. And Music Support are midway through launching a friends and family service, which I think is crucial because I don't think anyone finds their way to recovery on their own. And I just know from personal experience that sometimes it's the people that are supporting the people who are starting their journey in recovery who need support as well. So I think that's going to be a really valuable service that Music Support offer, which will be free. It's going to be a helpline. It's going to be peer support, and there's more details coming. And the other thing I was really keen to talk about. So my journey, the reason I'm here, is slightly different to yours in that I'm a tour manager. I've worked in this industry a long time, and I think anyone who has worked in this industry, it's inevitable you will have come up against addiction at some point. And after many years on tour, I felt ill-equipped to know what to do when I came up against that. And just before the pandemic, I lost one of my best friends to addiction, and that was a bit of a wake-up call. What happened was during the pandemic, I went on a bit of my own journey with mental health and actually started a peer support group that's still running, the Back Lounge. And part of that, I went and did mental health first aid training, which is something else that Music Support offers, which if you haven't heard of it, it's a global organisation, Mental Health First Aid, which Music Support pioneers in the UK. And it's very much about educating people about how to keep themselves well, but how to recognise signs in other people where they might need support, to know how you might be able to help them, and to know when and where to signpost to if it's something beyond your kind of remit. But what happened was I did this course during the pandemic with a colleague of mine who's a production manager, and both of us were talking about, we felt addiction was such a huge thing we'd both encountered, you know, working in live music. And we wanted an add-on. We wanted more information so we could be kind of equipped and have a toolkit to be able to help people we came across within the workplace. So we approached Music Support and said, you know, would you be able to create, excuse me, I have a cough. Would you be able to create some kind of resource for people like us to understand a little bit more about the psychology and physiology of addiction? And Music Support, we had lots of discussions, and what came out of that was, you know, this idea to create a workshop that could be provided to people working in live music or any facet of the music industry, that was easy to do, that was free, as a way to educate people as to what addiction means, and also, more importantly, what recovery means. And hearing you say about the support you got, you know, was key to your recovery. Yeah, really happy to say that Music Support now run that workshop. We fundraised for it, and it's very much a kind of nod towards trying to educate ourselves in. So this isn't just about if you recognize in yourself a problem, but it's how to support other people around you, whether that's a partner, a colleague, or people you come across in the workplace, like a lot of us do in the music industry. I couldn't recommend the course enough. We have lots of information at the stand, and Belinda, who's in the audience as well, we've got leaflets about that. So I feel like I've got my pitch in now.
That was a good that covered a lot of bases, I think. But actually, to carry on from that, because I remember when I came out from rehab and then spending 6 months at my parents' place, like I came out all fresh and, you know, I'd worked a lot of stuff out, etc. Whereas the wreckage that I left was, a lot of it was still there. Like, so I came out and there's almost this like resentment. It's like, well, you've sorted yourself out. Well, what about me? To some of the people who had been there for me before. And it's like, actually, it's really important that they get some sort of help, and you find ways of bridging those gaps between the people that supported you and you, because even though you might sort yourself out or begin your journey that's full of all this like rapture and this is all a great thing, but also actually they're still bitter and they need some way of dealing with those emotions. Complicated, very complicated emotions. Like being angry and happy for someone at the same time is really complicated. But yeah, so I think this course that Music Support offer is essential, I think.
I wonder then, as a touring musician, what have you found that's helped you stay on the road to recovery? Have there been specific behaviours you've adopted or dropped?
Yeah, so I don't drink on tour anymore? No. It's really hard to, in the current way that I think most people tour, it's really hard to stay sober, I would say. You have to be very, very deliberate. Like, you can't just say, I'm going to go on tour and not drink. You can't just say that and just expect to white knuckle it and that things will be okay. I have to be very open with the people I work with, like my tour manager, and just be like, look, my hotel rooms, can you like empty the minibar? If there is like I tend not to stick around for after parties, not because I necessarily think I'm going to be in danger, but I've been to enough of them, and I'm like, if we're going somewhere that's not in the venue, then I'll just say no. If it's at a venue and I've got some friends in the audience, I might hang out, but invariably I leave the venue because it's full of, you know, the sort of things that, you know, can lead you to whatever. I tend to leave the venue as soon as the gig's done. Which just gives me a bit more time, like, to myself, which is precious when you're on tour because you spend so much time with people all the time. Even if that means just getting back to the tour bus a bit earlier, chill out, watch something, decompress. Like, I've had to like learn how to exercise on tour, which has been a really good thing for just general mental health, but also because touring can be extremely boring because the gig only takes up X amount of your actual day. It's like 20% of what you're actually doing. Most of the time you're traveling or waiting for things. This as a performer, like crew have a slightly different experience, but so learning how to fill that dead time, taking yourself to a museum, taking yourself to lunch, being all right with spending time in your own head on your own, as opposed to having to go to every party, you know, do every single thing that everybody else is doing. Like, I've had to make a real conscious decision to spend time on my own, not necessarily in the hotel room or isolated in the bunk, but just spending deliberate time doing something that's not just backstage at the venue where all the rider is, where, you know, that's how you just spend so much time smoking and drinking, because it's like, well, it's there and I've got loads of time. So yeah, it's been quite challenging, but I've managed to, thankfully I've been supported by everybody I've worked with, because I've been very clear about it. And you'd be surprised at how many people are actually supportive if you are upfront and quite clear about it. You know, your mates from back home might, you know, take the mick, but when you're on the road, I think people you work with, in general, they want you to do your best work. So yeah, I've had to be very clear about what I need and be okay to say, no, I don't want to go to that, or just like disappear after a gig, because most people don't care.
It's two things you said I want to touch on, actually. One is, it sounds then like recovery takes some planning.
Oh, yeah.
When you're about to start a tour.
You have to, yeah.
So you make decisions before you go, this is how I'm going to handle this.
Yeah.
And I will remove myself from these situations because I don't have to be there. And the other thing I wanted to comment on was I commend your bravery to talk about recovery openly. A lot of people don't feel like they can. Thankfully, it's becoming a little bit more common to talk about it. And the fact you were able to speak to your colleagues that you work with and tour with and tell them you're in recovery and what you need to stay well. But I guess what I wonder about for a lot of people, if you're a musician, a session musician, or joining a new band, the stigma that's associated with addiction, how many people feel brave enough to be able to hold up their hands and say, this is my problem, this is how I deal with it, I am well now, but I need the following things.
It can be scary because by saying you have a problem, especially when you say going back to a band or something that you've worked with before, it can sometimes make people feel a bit uncomfortable because they feel like you're invariably saying that they have a problem because, we used to crack on together, like, what are you trying to say about me? Which you sometimes come up against, but it's not about them, it's about you and what you need, regardless of what their reaction is. And actually, if it holds up a mirror to people that you're around, then that's cool. But another thing I do is that, like, I'm not preaching to anybody I go on the road with. So if you still drink and, have the cheeky line, whatever, like, that's up to you. I'm not stopping you from doing anything. This is what I need. We're not here to go and tell people how to live their lives. And also, addiction looks different with different people. It's a very, very... There's as many different expressions of addiction as there are people, in the same way that no relationship is the same, no two couples are the same, you have to be very aware of other people's sensitivity to it because you don't know what their experience is with it. You just have to be clear about what you need and be compassionate and empathetic to their reaction and what they might actually need. And also oftentimes it opens a conversation to have with other people as well, that they actually weren't necessarily going to venture themselves, but actually because you've given them a bit of permission to open up, it can actually be a really healing thing. Because I remember, one thing I like to say is, remember I was talking about those bad decisions sort of closing in on me before I got sober, but like the blast radius of bad decisions is pretty far-reaching, but I found that the blast radius of my good decisions is way, way further. Like, I've had so many messages on social media, so many people in person coming up to me saying, oh, dude, like, thanks for talking about this stuff. Oh, can we chat about this? I need help with that. Or just from random people, because just as soon as you try and make yourself a bit better, for whatever reason, it invariably draws in so much positivity and spreads so much more light than the bad stuff that you've done, I've found.
I love that. It's making me think. So I run a peer support group, and we run quite regular discussions. They're always open Zooms on addiction and recovery. And those are the calls where I get the most follow-up afterwards. And I find quite often people are very ashamed to even say it out loud to themselves, or feel like they don't want to seek any kind of formal... Again, it's that self-judgment, isn't it? I love what you said about the sort of blast radius. And I think, again, that there's so many resources out there to help people. And I know we're in Scotland. It has a big problem, I think the biggest in the country, in the UK anyway. And I think any way that people can find support, if it's people like yourself, inspiring to actually take a look at themselves, whether it's attending a safe hub at festivals, which Music Support also run, but just being able to feel like people are enabled to actually open up and speak. I was going to say a couple of things, actually, because I'm a tour manager, and I work with a fair few musicians now who are in recovery, and I'm always grateful when people feel, able to tell me what they need. And in case there's anyone else here wondering how to cope with that, if there's a tour coming up and how best to look after the people they're with, I think step one is have a conversation with them, ask them what they need. I found what's been really helpful is to have a very sort of inclusive policy on tours. There's that inevitable thing on tours that there's the WhatsApp group, the day off. And the day off, depending on what tour you're on, might end up being, hey, let's all go to the pub and spend all day doing whatever. But invariably, it might involve drinking or partying. And if you're in recovery, that can be quite isolating. So what I've found helpful, again, on different tours I've worked on, is to try and connect people who are in recovery, try and change some of the culture around that recreational non-inclusive behavior, if you like, providing an alternative as well, having sometimes a dressing room that's, got an interesting selection of non-alcoholic drinks in, if booze is the problem. And I think it's just cultivating a mindset about, overcoming this stigma and welcoming people in, because I know for myself, I'm thinking of crew actually, which can be very hard if you're freelance to admit you have had a problem. And I think some of the strongest people I've worked with are people in recovery because, oh boy, have they been on a journey, to be with you. So I hope that might offer something of help.
But it's funny because it also seems, one thing I was worried about was, would my creativity go? And I think there's this sort of romanticized version of vision of, say, people like Jimi Hendrix and all of these guys, like heroes of ours that, seemed wasted or were wasted when they made all this amazing art. And you think that is part of the job. You think that is what takes it to the next level, which I found to be, BS. It's just like, I've never been more creative. I've never been better at accessing all my faculties. I've, since getting clean, me and my brother have written a graphic novel that's been published, and all this stuff I never thought I'd ever do because I had more time and I had more headspace to create. I think one of the stigmas that musicians in particular feel is that we really, really don't want to be considered lame. You just want to be cool. And again, part of that sort of Hendrix style thing, there's something like junkie chic. There's something that kind of just looks really appealing about being wiry and smoke encircled and sort of closing your eyes and being on the floor, which is, to an extent kind of looks appealing when you're a kid. But it's I think it's a bit of a lie that somehow needs to, there needs to be a cultural change of that doesn't make you good at what you do. And hot take, but I think that all of those bands would have made better music if they didn't smoke or do LSD or whatever. I just think it's, because that stuff is already in you anyways. It's just finding a healthier way or a healthy way to access it. And then actually you'll be able to express whatever it was, I think, with way more clarity. Yeah, that's a hot take I didn't expect to be dropping today, but there you go. But yeah, I just thought of that because you're talking about crew. I don't know, just this perception of yourself thinking one thing of yourself, but actually forget that sort of perception of it. It's just being your best self is way better than anything else. It's you're going to be better.
It's interesting you said about... she coughs. You said about being cool. Everyone wants to be cool, or everyone wants to be accepted. Everyone wants to be part of the gang. And again, I think there's that unique thing that happens in the music industry. And again, I'm thinking about touring. Suddenly you're stuck with this bunch of people, whether you like it or not sometimes. And we all want to fit in. And quite often we have to fit in fast. And I think there's a lot of pressure if you're on a party tour and what everyone else is doing is drinking or partaking in whatever. It takes a huge strength of character to actually go, that's not for me, thank you. And I wondered, have you got anything to offer people if they're about to maybe they're going on their first tour, they're planning, how am I going to be on this tour? Who do I want to be?
Who do I want to be is actually, it's a good question to ask yourself. I remember, I did that, it was 44 weeks I was in that rehab facility. And for the first 16, I wasn't allowed to touch a musical instrument. So I had a huge sort of identity crisis and really had to ask myself that question. Who am I? Who do I want to be? What am I with music? What am I without music? Am I what I do? Or is music a hobby that's a job? Is it a job that's a hobby? Like all of these sorts of things. And I think if you're going out on your first tour, I think you got to ask yourself, what do I want from this? Do I want to do this as a job for the rest of my life? Or do I want to like burn bright and fast and this potentially be over in 2 years? I think ask yourself what you want from it. Do you want a legacy? Do you want to just be rich and famous? That's fair enough. Then there's ways of doing that. But do you want to turn this into something that's valuable and something that you can share with other people and put some good into this world? I think if you ask yourself those questions, you're probably going to end up veering towards a style or a way of doing this that is more conducive to longevity. And then I think just being honest with the people that you're going to be doing it with, it's like, and again, I'm not saying that you have to, like every tour you have to be a monk and everybody has to get up at 7 and do yoga. It's like people have fun in their own ways, etc. But as an individual, how you want to approach it and sticking to your guns is the way to go. But make sure you're not doing it like white knuckling it alone. I think you said it quite well. It's like just make sure that the people you're touring with and like your tour manager in particular is aware that maybe you don't want to party every night. Maybe you're just doing it on days off, which I think is a really good, or the night before a day off is probably the best way to do it, as opposed to every night and every day, because that's where you just won't be able to do your job well. And at the end of the day, you want to express yourself and put your best foot forward, I'd say.
So what I'm taking from that then is have someone who knows.
Have someone who knows, for sure.
If you can.
Sobriety is it's a team sport.
Yeah. And connect with a community as well. Even better, if you have a community of people who are on the same journey as you, who have the same values as you. I don't know how we're doing for time. Does anyone have any questions? And I understand there isn't a mic, so if anyone has a question, they're going to have to shout.
Yeah, I can't tell.
We can't see a thing up here.
Well, nice. Thank you. Bit of mood lighting. Yeah, anybody got any questions? If not, I'm probably going to ask you a couple. How has it been for you? Have you noticed a difference pre-pandemic and post-pandemic in how people are addressing things like mental health and recovery and sobriety in the touring community?
Yeah, I have. I wish I had good news. But actually, what I've noticed, I think touring is harder than ever. I think we've come out of the pandemic, huge financial pressure. So that's massive pressure on the artist, having to deliver. Maybe it means their shows, they perform more shows in a week than they would have done. It's all about trying to put money in the pot. Huge pressure on the crews, because quite often, if there's not enough money, there's less crew. People have multiple roles. All this equals less sleep, higher stress levels. And higher stress levels, a coping mechanism often is reaching out to that thing that's been your prop. I wish I had an immediate solution to that, other than the more we talk about this, the more we recognize that this is an ongoing problem in the music industry. That's our way through this.
Yeah, do you think it's an individual thing, or is it something that management companies and record labels and booking agents and promoters, should they be more involved in the mental health and general health of their artists and the people and the crews that they work with, festivals as well?
I would 100% say yes. That would be the ultimate to aim for, definitely, to have, almost like a change in the culture of this sex, drugs, rock and roll, or the show must go on, into it actually, we look out for each other. I know the reality is, as a tour manager, I present the budget. The manager goes, okay, what can we cut? You know, why isn't the bottom line bigger? You know, it's always about money saving or putting more money into the pot. And rarely what isn't taken into consideration there is mental health. And I mean, we've seen a lot of very high profile artists very openly come out and cancel tours because of their mental health. I know some of those have been addiction problems. That's not always been public. Again, there's still a stigma, which hopefully we're starting to break down. But I also think the best scenario is that everyone is on board for this, but what can we do, each of us individually today? And I think that's look out for the next person next to you. You know, how can you support them? How can you intervene if you think, if it's from having a bad day to, you know, really having a bad time, or maybe, you know, struggling? You know, if you have the guts to maybe privately say, hey, are you okay? Can I help with something? That can mean a lot to people. And I think that's something everyone can do, definitely. I think as well, make use of the resources. I know Scotland has a lot of amazing resources around mental health and around addiction. And again, we have a list of some of those on our stand, on the music support stand. And of course, there's music support who have a helpline. Lots of people who, you know, are connected with music support, myself included, who are championing to try and make things better.
Hey, you can also DM me as well, because I am up for chatting to anybody, and I am open to chatting to any, especially about this, about mental health, about, especially for musicians, but even if you're not a musician and you just want to have a chat about how it works, how it can be, strategies on sort of staying sober, staying clean, or if you're thinking about it, who to talk to, podcasts that you could listen to that are useful or helpful. Because it's also not, it also, I think the way of approaching the thinking of it is not just that you're giving up things. So I think when you approach things often from like just a negative standpoint, like, oh, I can't drink anymore, oh, I can't stay up all night, oh, I can't do all this, that can really, like, why would you want to do that? But if you can change the framework and be like, oh, but I can do this, I'm now going to gain all this, which has been my experience. There have been hard times because it is, you know, there's a bar opposite me. Like, you can't get away from booze or all of these things. But times of like temptation and all that stuff, it all fades. Like, nothing lasts forever. Yeah, there's so much good. There's so many more benefits than there are downsides to any of this. You might feel a bit lame for a night. You know, you might get a bit of FOMO every now and then. But yeah, send me a message and I'll let you know how it's working out.
Can we get a time check? How long have we got? 15?
Is anybody new? Does anybody have any questions?
I think they're shy.
No, it's all right. This doesn't really matter. Well, hopefully some of the things that we've spoken about has resonated with people. Like we say, music support has a stand out there, so you can just have a chat with Belinda. Oh, we got a hand up. Bro, I'm going to have to ask you to come forward because I can't really hear you.
I heard the first bit. Have you got any tips or tricks?
I'm scared. Do you have any tips or tricks in terms of finding a happy medium between complete sobriety and the opposite, whatever that would be?
Complete sobriety and train wreck, for sure. And again, I'm not. One thing I'm really not an advocate of is telling people how to live and being like, this is how it's worked for me, this is how it has to be for you. Like, not at all. Like, I'm a bleeding heart lefty all day long. But I think one of the problems with that is that sometimes people just shout at other people and expect them to do the same thing. In my experience, I'd rather show somebody by the way I live what's a way that's worked for me. But I know a bunch of people who, for example, not to say that you should or whatever, but some people still like smoke through recovery. Like they might give up everything else, but that might be one thing they do. Maybe non-alcoholic beers are something that I drink every now and then. And like maybe like when you're going out, especially with, especially on tour, say just choosing your battles as opposed to having to go to every event possible. I think that's one of the problems. We feel the pressure that we need to every night at everything possible to crack on. And it's just like, why not just when there's a day off when it makes sense? Why not say, I don't know what do you do? Right, okay. So maybe at your events or something like that, that's when you know, because obviously it's part of like the job, like socializing with people, schmoozing, etc. That's when you like maybe have a drink, etc., or with your friends. I think the problems often start when you're doing it every day and when you're doing it alone in particular. I think that's a real indicator of when something is teetering into sort of troublesome territory. But if you're in company and there's limits on whatever you're getting on with, I think in particular in company is a really good thing. If it's an event, that makes sense. If it's just I'm bored and it's 2 p.m., that's a problem. Yeah.
I want to add something, actually. I was thinking back to one of your earlier points about forward planning. I think if we've got Christmas coming up, it's endless opportunity to get as wasted as you like pretty much every night. I think if you're starting to think that you're spending a bit too much time doing that, again, everyone is different, and it's about getting to know yourself and getting to know your limits. And that might be as simple as at least starting off with, okay, every week I'm going to have 2 nights a week where I don't drink, I don't indulge. And if that's all you manage in the run down to Christmas, it's a start.
10 out of 10.
I think the other thing, and this really surprised me, and I was listening to something about binge drinking, which us Brits are famous for. And apparently, at the point they say it's binging is more than 6 drinks. I think it's 6 units. And if you think 6 units, if you're out having a few drinks with your mates,
light work.
Yeah, you know, and it was just an interesting revelation, because I thought, oh my gosh, that probably most of my friends would fit into that category of regular binge drinkers. But I guess what I'm saying is, when is the last time you took a look at your own habits? Maybe, and whether it's now or whether you set yourself a bit of a deadline, it's time to start working out, well, how, if I'm talking about alcohol as the example here, because it's the easiest available, but it might not do harm to have a good look at your drinking habits. You know, have things crept up a bit lately? What are your triggers? When do you drink more? Is it when you're having a bad time? Is it when you're lonely? Is it Friday night, you've had a rough week, you hate your job? If you can try and identify some of your triggers, you got a chance at how to start reducing things. And obviously for some people, the only way to do it is to stop completely.
Yeah, but that's not the only... Absolute abstinence isn't necessarily the answer, but I think it's more about just looking at it, being aware of what you're doing, and those around you, and like, am I just trying to keep up with everybody, or am I actually enjoying this? Like, have I stayed for 2 hours longer than I actually really wanted to? Like, I tend to an hour and a half is all you get out of me. If I'm going out to like an event or something like that, from the time I get there to the time I leave, in general, is about 90 minutes. Because I think from most things, even that's a headline set. It's like, more than that, what am I doing here? Like, nothing new is happening between 10:30, 11 and 2 a.m. Like, at all, except for there being less trains. I mean, what else?
Well, nothing they can remember. Anyway.
Yeah, no point. And you don't want to be... I also don't want to be the only sober person at a function at 2 a.m. Not because, like, to make it... I don't want anyone else to feel self-conscious about themselves either. Not because I don't want to have fun, but it's like I want people to just enjoy themselves and not be thinking, oh, he's going to remember everything, like, tomorrow. It's like I also considerately would rather not be there.
But it's peer pressure again, isn't it? And I've noticed an interesting thing with crew in that it's quite often it's the older crew who are the ones that are partying harder than the younger crew. And it gives me a little bit of hope of at least some of the generation coming in. They look after themselves a lot more than a certain generation that I probably come from. But consequently, I work with a lot of maturer musicians, and the ones that are still in their game, they're not partying anymore. If they ever did, they've cleaned themselves up, and it is very much about longevity. So I guess at the end of the day, if you're always going to be looking to the people around you as a guide as to how well you are, if you've got a problem, someone else over there's got a problem worse, you've got to decide for yourself, really, rather than, the barometer being everybody else, because it depends who you're with.
For sure. Anybody else got a question? Well, thank you, buddy. I appreciate that. That's probably about time, actually.
I think. So we've got a stand over in the first arch. Please come and say hello. We've got information about the addiction recovery workshop, which, as I said, it's free. The mental health first aid, which we have bursaries for. The safe hubs we operate at festivals. And the family and friends service that we're about to start offering as well. So thank you very much for your time.
Nice one, guys.